Have you ever felt like you were the wrong person for the job? You felt too old, too broken, too afraid, or too ordinary? Today, we're telling the story of a man who felt exactly the same way. A man who stuttered when he tried to speak. A man who had a criminal past. A man who spent 40 years hiding in the desert, convinced his best days were behind him. But God saw something different. God saw a deliverer, a leader who would face the most powerful king on earth and win, a prophet who would speak face to face with God, a man who would lead millions of people out of slavery and into freedom. This is the story of Moses, the reluctant hero who became one of the greatest leaders in all of human history. Our story begins in Egypt, centuries after Joseph had saved the nation from famine. Remember Joseph, the Hebrew slave who became Pharaoh's second in command? Well, that Pharaoh is long dead. And the new Pharaoh, he doesn't remember Joseph. He doesn't care what the Hebrews did for Egypt. All he sees is a problem. The Israelites have multiplied and grown strong. There are so many of them now that Pharaoh feels threatened. What if war breaks out, he thinks? What if these Hebrews join our enemies and fight against us? So Pharaoh makes a decision: enslave them, force them into brutal labor, make them build his cities, Pithom and Ramesses, using mud and straw under the scorching Egyptian sun. Work them to death. But here's the thing about trying to destroy God's people. It doesn't work. The more the Egyptians oppressed the Israelites, the more they multiplied. They just kept reproducing. So Pharaoh comes up with an evil plan. He calls in the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and tells them, when you help Hebrew women give birth, if it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. But these midwives fear God more than they fear Pharaoh. They refuse to murder innocent babies. When Pharaoh confronts them, they say, Hebrew women are strong. They give birth before we even get there. God blesses these brave women for their courage. But Pharaoh isn't done. He issues a horrific command to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile. But let every girl live. Into this nightmare, a baby boy is born. His mother, we later learn her name is Jochebed, looks at her newborn son, and the Bible says she sees that he's a fine child. For 3 months, she hides him. But you can only hide a baby for so long. They cry, and eventually someone will hear. So Jochebed does something desperate and brilliant. She creates a papyrus basket, seals it with tar and pitch to ensure it is waterproof, places her baby inside, and gently sets it among the reeds by the Nile River. His sister observes from afar to see what will happen. Then Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the Nile to bathe. She sees the basket, sends her slave girl to get it, and when she opens it, there's a crying baby inside. She knows immediately this is a Hebrew child, probably one of the babies her father ordered killed. But when she sees him crying, her heart melts. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she says. That's when Miriam makes her move. She steps forward and asks, should I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, Pharaoh's daughter tells her. Miriam runs home and gets her mother. Pharaoh's daughter says to Jochebed, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. Pause for a minute and think about what just happened. The woman whose father ordered all Hebrew boys killed is now paying Moses' own mother to raise him. The irony of God is truly magnificent. When the boy is older, Jochebed brings him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopts him as her own son. She names him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So Moses grows up in Pharaoh's palace. He gets the best education Egypt can offer. He learns to read and write. He learns Egyptian culture, military strategy, and administration. He's being raised as an Egyptian prince. But he knows he's Hebrew. He knows those slaves building Pharaoh's cities are his people. At the age of 40, Moses decides to visit his own people, the Israelites. He watches them doing hard labor. And then he sees something that changes everything. He sees an Egyptian is beating a Hebrew slave, one of Moses' own people. Moses looks around, checking if anyone's paying attention. Nobody is watching, so he kills the Egyptian and hides the body in the sand. The next day, Moses goes out again. This time he sees two Hebrews fighting each other. He says to the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man sneers at him. "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses is terrified. His secret has been revealed. Everyone knows what he did. When Pharaoh hears about it, he tries to kill Moses. But Moses flees. He runs all the way across the desert to the land of Midian, hundreds of miles away. He sits down by a well, tired and alone, a fugitive. Everything he had is gone. His position, his power, his future is gone. He's a murderer on the run. And that's where his story could have ended. A man who threw away his privilege and his purpose in one moment of violence. But God isn't done with Moses yet. While Moses is sitting by the well, 7 daughters of a Midianite priest come to draw water for their father's flocks. Some shepherds show up and try to drive the girls away, but Moses steps in and helps them. The girls run home to their father Reuel, also called Jethro, and tell him what happened. "An Egyptian rescued us," they say. "Where is he?" their father asks. "Invite him to have something to eat." Moses ends up staying with this family. He marries one of Jethro's daughters, Zipporah, and becomes a shepherd. They have a son named Gershom, which means foreigner, because Moses says, "I've become a foreigner in a foreign land." Prince Moses is now a shepherd. The man trained in all the wisdom of Egypt is now tending sheep in the desert. 40 years pass. Moses is now 80 years old. That's right, 80. Most people would be thinking about retirement. Moses is just herding sheep day after day, probably thinking his life is basically over. Before we continue, I want to point out something. God did not choose the 40-year-old Moses, a prince, strong, educated, skilled, had political influence and physically fit. Instead, he used an 80-year-old Moses, a murderer, weak, old, insignificant, a stutterer, and a foreigner. God had to remove Egypt out of Moses before he could use him. He was preparing him for the wilderness. God doesn't need our impressiveness. He uses broken jars of clay. 2 Cor 4:7. People who, like Moses, ask, "Who am I that you would use me?" And it's there, in that confession of weakness, that his power is perfected, his glory revealed, his grace radiant. 2 Corinthians 12:9-10. Let's continue with the story. One ordinary day, while tending sheep near a mountain called Horeb, Moses saw something strange, a bush, on fire but not burning up. Curious, he stepped closer. And from the flames a voice called Moses. "Moses!" "Here I am," Moses replies. "Don't come any closer," God says. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." Then God identifies himself. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hides his face. He's afraid to look at God. And then God says something Moses never expected to hear. "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." Moses must be thinking, yes, finally, God is going to do something. But then God drops the bombshell. "So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." "Wait, what? Who am I?" Moses stammers. "That I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God answers, "I will be with you." But Moses isn't convinced. He raises objection after objection. "What if they ask me your name? What should I tell them?" God says, "I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent you." What if they don't believe me or listen to me? God gives him signs. His staff turns into a snake and back. His hand becomes leprous and then heals. He can turn water into blood. "I'm not a good speaker, Lord. I'm slow of speech and tongue." God reminds him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Finally, Moses just begs, "Please, Lord, send someone else." Now God is angry. "What about your brother Aaron? He can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you. You'll speak to him and put words in his mouth." I'll help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He'll speak to the people for you. Moses has run out of excuses. At 80 years old, after 40 years in the desert, he's about to go back to Egypt, the place where he's wanted for murder, and tell the most powerful man on earth to let God's people go. Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and say, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh laughs. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Pharaoh not only refuses, but he also makes matters worse for the Israelites. "You're lazy," he tells them. "That's why you're asking to go worship your God. Get back to work. And from now on you have to gather your own straw to make bricks. But you still have to produce the same number of bricks as before." It is impossible. When the Israeli foremen fail to meet their quotas, they are beaten. They turn on Moses, saying, "May the Lord look upon you and judge you. That you have made us unpleasant to Pharaoh and his officials, and you have placed a sword in their hands to kill us." Moses goes back to God, discouraged. "Why, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." But God says, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." God had already warned Moses that Pharaoh would demand proof. So Moses and Aaron walked into the royal court of Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler of the time, not with weapons, not with an army, but with a shepherd's staff. Pharaoh looked at them and asked for a miracle. At God's instruction, Aaron threw his staff down before him. The staff hit the floor and became a serpent. But Pharaoh called in his own magicians. Through their secret arts, they did the same thing. Their staffs also became serpents. For a brief moment, it may have looked like a draw, until something unexpected happened. Aaron's serpent swallowed theirs, one by one. Then it became a staff again. The message was clear without a word being spoken. The God of Israel was not one among many. He was greater. Yet even after witnessing this, Pharaoh's heart hardened. The sign had been given. The warning had been shown. And what followed next would shake an entire nation. One by one, 10 devastating plagues strike that shook Egypt. Each one is a direct challenge to Egypt's gods, showing that the God of Israel is the only true God. It began with the Nile. God told Moses to go to the river Nile in the morning, just as Pharaoh did. Stand by the bank of the Nile with the staff that turned into a serpent. Say to him, "Let my people go." But if you will not listen, behold, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it shall turn to blood. That morning, as the golden sun rose over Egypt, Pharaoh came down to the Nile. Moses stood waiting, staff in hand, just as God had commanded. He raised his staff over the water, and with one powerful strike, the Nile turned to blood. The fish died. The river stank. The water became undrinkable. The river that sustained their crops, their animals, their entire civilization now stank with death. Egypt was in shock. Yet Pharaoh hardened his heart even more. In the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, the water remained clean. But over in Egypt, the Nile was blood, and Pharaoh still refused to listen. Then came the frogs. The river released something far worse. Frogs poured out in overwhelming numbers, invading every space imaginable. They filled homes, climbed into beds, crowded ovens, and spilled into kneading bowls. There was no escaping them. Pharaoh, desperate for relief, asked Moses to pray and promised freedom in return. But when the frogs died and were cleared away in heaps, the king's promise died with them. His heart hardened once more. Next, the dust beneath their feet became their torment. When Aaron struck the ground, the fine particles rose and turned into gnats, bugs, that covered people and animals alike. They swarmed into eyes, noses, and skin. Even Pharaoh's magicians were forced to admit, "This is the finger of God." Still, Pharaoh refused to yield. What followed next was swarms of flies, thick and relentless. They filled Egyptian homes, spoiled food, and disrupted daily life. Yet in Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there were none. God was making a clear distinction between his people and Egypt. Pharaoh tried to compromise, but when the pressure eased, his stubbornness came back. The fifth plague was a disease that affected livestock. Egypt's strength began to weaken when a plague strikes the livestock. Horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats collapsed in the fields. The economic backbone of the nation suffered a devastating blow. Yet not a single animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and saw the difference, but pride outweighed reason. After that, Moses threw soot into the sky, causing terrible boils to appear on everyone in Egypt, including the animals, festering and unbearable. Even the magicians could not stand before Moses because of their suffering. Despite the visible affliction across his kingdom, Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn. Then came hail. Egypt is hit by the worst hailstorm in its history. Thunder and lightning and hail pound the land. Everything in the fields is destroyed, including people, animals, and vegetation. Trees are shattered. The only place without hail is Goshen, where the Israelites lived. Pharaoh confesses his sin during the storm, but when the hail stopped, so did his repentance. The locusts appeared next. Locusts cover the face of the ground until it's black. What little survived was consumed by locusts. They arrived like a living cloud, covering the ground until it appeared black. Every remaining plant, every green thing left after the hail was devoured. Egypt was stripped bare. Pharaoh's own officials pleaded with him to surrender, yet once relief came, Pharaoh refuses again. Then came darkness, thick, suffocating darkness that lasted 3 days. People can't see anyone else or leave their homes, but in the areas where the Israelites live, there is light. Pharaoh tells Moses to go, but to leave their flocks and herds. Moses refuses. Not a hoof is to be left behind. Pharaoh explodes in rage. "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." Moses replies, "Just as you say, I will never appear before you again." And he walks away. 9 times Egypt had been shaken. 9 times Pharaoh had been given the chance to humble himself. But the hardest heart in the land still refused to break. And something far more devastating was about to unfold. God spoke quietly but firmly to Moses. One more. One final act, one final confrontation. After this, Pharaoh would not just release them, he will drive you out completely. This time, the warning carried a weight unlike anything before. Every firstborn son in Egypt would die, from Pharaoh's son to the prisoners' sons, even the firstborn of the livestock. But not one Israelite will be harmed. God gives Moses detailed instructions for the Israelites. On the 10th day of this month, each family is to select a lamb, 1 year old, without defect. On the 14th day at twilight, they're to slaughter the lamb. They must take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the doorframes of their houses. That same night, they're to roast the lamb and eat it with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. They must eat it with their cloaks tucked into their belts, their sandals on their feet, their staffs in their hands. They must eat quickly. It is the Lord's Passover. God says, "On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." This is to become a lasting tradition for the Israelites, a memorial feast celebrated for generations to come, reminding them of the night God delivered them from slavery. At midnight, the Lord strikes down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon and the firstborn of all the livestock. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians get up during the night, and there is loud wailing in Egypt, for there's not a house without someone dead. Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron during the night. "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go, and also bless me." The same ruler who once demanded worship was now asking for a blessing. The Egyptians urge the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they say, we will all die. After 430 years, generations born into chains, the Israelites were walking out, about 600,000 men on foot, not counting women and children. They carried unleavened dough wrapped in their kneading bowls, thrown over their shoulders. There had been no time for yeast. There is no time for preparation beyond obedience. And they ask the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Egyptians give them what they ask for. What had once been forced labor ended in favor. They left not as slaves fleeing in secret, but as a people released. God had kept his word. The night that began with judgment ended with freedom, and Egypt would never be the same again. God doesn't lead them on the road through Philistine country, even though that's shorter. He knows if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. Instead, he leads them around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. Moses takes the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. By day, the Lord goes ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide their way. By night, he's in a pillar of fire to give them light. They can travel day or night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never leaves its place in front of the people. Then God tells Moses to camp by the sea. Pharaoh will think you're wandering around the land in confusion, surrounded by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue you. But I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. Sure enough, when Pharaoh is told the people have fled, he changes his mind. What have we done? We've let the Israelites go and have lost their services. He takes 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, and pursues the Israelites. As Pharaoh's army approaches, the Israelites look up and see the Egyptians marching after them. They're terrified. The sea is in front of them, mountains on either side, and the most powerful army in the world is behind them. They're trapped. They cry out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." But Moses tells them, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the Lord says to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." The angel of God, who has been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdraws and goes behind them. The pillar of cloud also moves from in front and stands behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brings darkness to one side and light to the other. Moses stretches out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drives the sea back with a strong east wind and turns it into dry land. The waters are divided, and the Israelites go through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursue them. All Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen follow them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looks down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and throws it into confusion. He jams the wheels of their chariots so that they have difficulty driving. The Egyptians cry out, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord says to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretches out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returns to its place. The Egyptians try to flee, but the Lord sweeps them into the sea. The water flows back and covers the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that has followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survives. But the Israelites go through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saves Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And when the Israelites see the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, they fear the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. The impossible has happened. The slaves are free. The most powerful army on earth has been destroyed. And Moses, the stuttering shepherd, the murderer, the man who said he couldn't do it, has led God's people to freedom. 3 months after walking out of Egypt, the Israelites found themselves in a wide, open wilderness, the desert of Sinai. In front of them stood Mount Sinai, rising from the earth like a boundary between heaven and man. Moses goes up to God, and the Lord calls to him from the mountain, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." God wasn't just rescuing slaves, he was forming a people. Moses returns and tells the people, and together, as one voice, they answered, "We will do everything the Lord has said." On the 3rd day, Mount Sinai was covered in smoke because the Lord descended in fire. Smoke rose like it was pouring from a furnace. The mountain shook violently beneath their feet. This was no quiet moment of inspiration. This was holy. God calls Moses to the top of the mountain, and there God speaks the 10 Commandments. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. You shall not covet." The people are so terrified by the thunder, lightning, trumpet blast, and smoking mountain that they tell Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But don't have God speak to us, or we will die." Moses tells them, "Don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will keep you from sinning." Moses went back up the mountain, and he stayed there 40 days and 40 nights. God gives him detailed instructions, not just the 10 Commandments, but laws about everything: worship, justice, property, relationships, festivals. God also gives him plans for the tabernacle, a portable tent where God's presence will dwell among his people. God was not distant, he was moving in, and then something extraordinary happened. God himself wrote the 10 Commandments on 2 stone tablets, not dictated, written by his own handwriting. The God who shook the mountain was also the God who inscribed his covenant in stone, a lasting sign that this was not just law, it was relationship. But while Moses is on the mountain, the people grow impatient. They go to Aaron. "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron, who should know better, tells them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." They bring the gold, and Aaron makes it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf. The people say, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." Aaron builds an altar in front of the calf and announces, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." The next day, the people offer sacrifices and hold a celebration. Up on the mountain, the Lord tells Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf." God says, "I have seen these people, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses pleads with the Lord, "Why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains? Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self. The Lord relents and doesn't bring the disaster. Moses goes down the mountain with the 2 tablets in his hands. When he gets near the camp and sees the calf and the dancing, his anger burns. He throws the tablets down and breaks them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. He takes the calf they made, burns it in the fire, grinds it to powder, scatters it on the water, and makes the Israelites drink it. Moses stands at the entrance to the camp and says, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." All the Levites rally to him. About 3,000 people died that day for their sin. The next day Moses says to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." Moses goes back to the Lord and says, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." Moses is offering his own life for the people. But God says, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book." God gives Moses new stone tablets, and he renews the covenant with Israel. Moses spends another 40 days and nights on the mountain. When he comes down, his face is radiant because he has spoken with the Lord. The people are afraid to come near him, so Moses puts a veil over his face. But the journey from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land doesn't go smoothly. As the people moved through the wilderness, the excitement of freedom slowly faded into frustration. The desert was harsh, the days were long, and soon the complaints began. They started remembering Egypt, not the slavery, not the chains, but the food. "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic, but now we've lost our appetite. All we ever see is this manna." Manna, the very bread God provided daily from heaven, had become ordinary in their eyes. What once felt like a miracle now felt like a burden. Moses is overwhelmed. The constant grumbling, the endless demands, the pressure of leading thousands through uncertainty. He cried out to God, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to deserve the burden of all these people? Did I conceive them? Did I give them birth? Why must I carry them like a nurse carries an infant? If this is how it's going to be, please just end my life." This was not rebellion, it was burnout. And God responded with both provision and support. He sent quail so the people would have meat, and he appointed 70 elders to stand alongside Moses, men who would share the responsibility of leadership. Eventually, they arrived at the edge of Canaan, the land God had promised. Moses sends 12 spies to explore the land. They're gone for 40 days. When they return, they bring back a single cluster of grapes so large it takes 2 men to carry it on a pole. Moses sent 12 spies to explore the land. For 40 days, they traveled through valleys and hills, observing cities and people. When they returned, they carried proof of the land's abundance. A single cluster of grapes so large it had to be carried on a pole between 2 men. "The land truly flows with milk and honey," they said, "but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large." Fear began to spread. 10 of the spies give a bad report. "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. The land devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." But 2 voices stood firm, Joshua and Caleb. Caleb stepped forward and silenced the crowd. "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Same land, same giants, different perspective, but the people chose fear. They wept through the night. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron. They even talked about choosing a new leader to take them back to Egypt, back to slavery. God is ready to destroy them, but Moses intercedes again. God pardons them, but declares, "Not one of you will enter the land except Caleb and Joshua. The children you feared would be taken as plunder. They will enter and enjoy it. But your bodies will fall in this wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day the land was explored. You will wander. The journey that could have taken 11 days would now take 40 years, an entire generation. The very ones who walked through the Red Sea would not step into the promise. Their children would. So they wandered through heat, through dust, through lessons learned slowly. The wilderness was no longer just a path, it became a classroom. And sometimes the greatest delays in life are not because God is slow, but because fear is loud. Even Moses, the man who faced Pharaoh, who lifted his staff over the Red Sea, who stood on Mount Sinai wrapped in glory, makes a critical mistake. The people are at Kadesh with no water, and once again there was no water. Once again the complaints started. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to this terrible place? There's no grain, no figs, no grapevines, no pomegranates, and no water to drink. It was the same pattern, pressure, complaints, and accusations. Moses and Aaron go to the tent of meeting and fall face down. The glory of the Lord appears to them, and God tells Moses, "Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." Moses took the staff and gathered the people in front of the rock. But this time something was different. You can hear the frustration in his voice. "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raises his arm and strikes the rock twice with his staff. Water gushes out, and the community and their livestock drink. But the Lord says to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." After everything, the burning bush, confronting Pharaoh, the 10 plagues, the Red Sea, Mount Sinai, 40 years in the wilderness, Moses will not enter the promised land. Why? Because in his anger and frustration, Moses took credit for the miracle, "Must we bring you water?" and struck the rock instead of speaking to it. He failed to honor God as holy before the people. He acted in frustration instead of trust. To the people watching, it looked like Moses produced the miracle. But Moses was never the source. He was the servant. It seems harsh, but God's standard for leaders is high. Moses represents God to the people, and this moment of pride and disobedience has consequences. Sometimes one moment of misplaced anger can cost more than we imagine. 40 years pass. The generation that walked through the Red Sea is gone. One by one, their bodies return to the wilderness dust. The children who once played in desert camps are now grown, stronger, steadier, ready. A new generation stands at the edge of promise. Aaron dies on Mount Hor, and his son Eleazar becomes the high priest. The people face battles and win victories. They defeat kingdoms east of the Jordan River. They're camped on the plains of Moab, across the Jordan from Jericho. Moses knows his time is coming to an end. He gathers the people and delivers 3 long speeches, the book of Deuteronomy. He reminds them of everything: the deliverance from Egypt, the covenant at Sinai, the failures in the wilderness, the faithfulness of God. He repeats the laws, not as rules to control them, but as guidance to protect them. He warns them about disobedience. He speaks of blessings for obedience. He urges them not to forget who brought them this far. And then he says words that would echo through generations. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength." Before he leaves, Moses appoints Joshua as his successor, the quiet spy who once believed, the man who trusted when others feared. God speaks directly to Joshua. "Be strong and courageous. You will bring the Israelites into the land I promised them, and I myself will be with you." Then Moses climbs Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. From there, God shows him everything: Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. God says to him, This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. He sees the promise, but he does not step into it. And there on Mount Nebo, Moses, the servant of the Lord, dies. He's 120 years old, yet his eyes are not weak, nor his strength gone. On a mountain with God. God himself buries Moses in Moab, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. The Israelites grieve for Moses for 30 days. Joshua son of Nun is filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses laid his hands on him. The Israelites listen to Joshua and do what the Lord commanded Moses. The Bible ends Moses' story with these words. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, the one who performed signs and wonders before Pharaoh and all Egypt, the one who displayed mighty power and awesome deeds in the sight of all Israel. Moses didn't enter the land, but he fulfilled his calling. He confronted kings, he carried a nation, he spoke with God, he led slaves into freedom, he turned wanderers into a people. The journey ends, but the promise continues. Moses' life is a story of transformation, redemption, and imperfect obedience. He was a murderer who became a deliverer, a stuttering shepherd who confronted the most powerful king on earth, a man who said, "I can't," but did anyway, with God's help. Moses teaches us that God uses broken people. He doesn't wait until you're perfect, until you're eloquent, until you're young enough or old enough or qualified enough. He calls you where you are and says, "I'll be with you." Moses shows us that leadership is costly. He gave up comfort in Pharaoh's palace to identify with suffering slaves. He spent 40 years in the desert preparing for his calling. He endured constant complaints, rebellion, and ingratitude. And in the end, he didn't get to enter the promised land himself. But Moses also shows us the power of intercession. Again and again, when God was ready to destroy the people, Moses stood in the gap. He pleaded for them. He offered his own life for theirs. He was a mediator between a holy God and a sinful people. And in this way, Moses points us to someone greater than himself, Jesus Christ, the ultimate mediator, the prophet like Moses whom God promised would come. Where Moses delivered Israel from physical slavery in Egypt, Jesus delivers us from spiritual slavery to sin. Where Moses gave the law on stone tablets, Jesus writes God's law on our hearts. Where Moses led people to an earthly promised land, Jesus leads us to an eternal home. And where Moses couldn't enter the promised land because of his sin, Jesus has opened the way for us through his perfect obedience and sacrifice. Maybe today you feel like Moses at the burning bush, inadequate, afraid, convinced you're the wrong person for what God is calling you to do. Remember, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. He was with Moses, and he'll be with you. Maybe you're in your own wilderness right now, waiting, wondering if God has forgotten you, feeling like your best years are behind you. Remember, Moses was 80 when God called him from the burning bush. Your story isn't over. God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't feel like it. Or maybe you've failed, and you're living with consequences like Moses did when he couldn't enter the promised land. Or maybe you've made mistakes, and you're living with consequences. Moses did too. He saw the promised land but didn't cross into it. And yet God still called him my servant. His life still mattered, his faithfulness still counted. And hundreds of years later, Moses appeared with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. So in the end, he did make it to the promised land after all. God's grace is bigger than your failures. His purposes can't be stopped by your mistakes. And his presence is with you, just as he was with Moses, in the fire, through the sea, in the wilderness, and all the way home. Thank you for walking through the life of Moses with me today. If this encouraged you, please like this video and subscribe for more biblical stories told with care. Let me know in the comments, what part of Moses' story speaks to you right now? The burning bush, the Red Sea, the wilderness, or the mountaintop? Until next time, may you have the courage to say yes when God calls, even when you feel unqualified, because with God, all things are possible. God bless you, and may all the glory be to God, yesterday, today, and forever.